Hello, beautiful, and welcome to the Moms Talk Sex podcast with me, More Yelvington, your host. I am so excited that you are here, and I am very honored to have the beautiful Andrea with me here today.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for coming on because I know that this conversation is going to be life-changing to a lot of our listeners. So if you're listening and you're a mom, this is going to be an amazing podcast for you. So, Andrea, how about you kind of tell us about yourself and what it is that you do?
Okay, so I am in the UK, clearly. I am a cognitive behavioral therapist, so CBT, counselor, psychotherapist, whatever word you want to choose. And I have run my practice for 9 years. So I went into private practice after I retrained to become a therapist after I had my daughter. So coming up, she's 10 in November. So yeah, so just coming up 10 years ago. And I specialize in working with mums. So all things postnatal mental health, and that sort of transition into motherhood and all the things that encompasses in regards to your emotional and mental health. So I do some stuff around, um, I, I've done some training around sort of infant and baby and breastfeeding and all that kind of stuff, but predominantly what I do is all around the mental health stuff.
I love that. And so, how do we relate mental health to sex? Is it related? Is it not related?
Well, I suppose that depends on how important your sex life is to you in your relationship. Because if it's something that, and I think for most people it is important, if it's something that's important to you in your relationship and that feeling of connection and intimacy, and one of the first things that goes when you are struggling with your mental health is your sex drive. So the two are intrinsically woven together. Because your body, our brain is, the old part of the brain is still hardwired to go, having sex is to make a baby. We know now that we have sex for pleasure, but
Right.
fundamentally, the brain goes, we have sex to make a baby. So if you're not in the best mental state to be able to do that, your brain will go, now is not the best time to make a baby. And so your sex drive will go down. So they are intrinsically linked. So that's why people will notice a lack of sex drive if they are struggling with stress or depression or anxiety or any of those things. So that's kind of how.
That is so interesting, and it's so true. And so, I'm curious. We were talking about a little bit earlier about how what happens when after you have a baby, why the sex drive goes down, and how to actually handle that in a relationship. So, maybe you can show some insight.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting. So, when I'm gonna, as we talk now, I'm just relating this mainly to sort of a heterosexual relationship. Obviously, there's different ramifications if it's a same-sex relationship, but for the purposes of what we're going to talk about now, it's a heterosexual relationship. But when a woman has a baby, you if you've got an infant or even a toddler that is on you all the time, is either if you've got a baby and you're breastfeeding, or you're holding a baby, or even holding a toddler, you are getting a lot of oxytocin. So the oxytocin is that nice feeling we get when we are close to somebody, when we have the hugs and the cuddles. When you've got a baby, your oxytocin needs are being met. So the drive to seek that in someone else goes down. That feeling of that need to want to have hugs with a partner, closeness with a partner, it decreases because you're getting that from holding onto cuddling your baby, cuddling your toddler. Conversely, though, when you've got a baby hanging off you all the live long day, you can be very touched out. And the idea of being touched more in the evening is an absolute no. So you tend to sit in that there's those two factors are the biggest sort of, not the biggest, but they're two of the most important things as to why women particularly will notice that they don't particularly want to be intimate with a partner in the first year, sometimes longer, depending on, again, how long you breastfeed for, after you've had a baby. So those two things are definitely factors. Obviously, sleep deprivation is a massive factor, because if you're tired, and again, with stereotypically in most partnerships, it is the woman who's good. If it's a same-sex partnership, then the person who's giving birth is usually the one who's doing most of the night stuff and getting the least amount of sleep. So your sex drive will go down because of that. The other big factor is what your body physically goes through after birth. And this isn't all women, at 6 weeks you are cleared to be intimate, and if you're up for it and you want to, absolutely grand. But for a lot of women, they will not be, because physically their body is still recovering. I forgot what I was going to say. So that's part of it, the physical side of it, the lack of sleep, and then the body image. Obviously, your body goes through so many changes after you've had a baby. You gain weight. When you've got a baby or a toddler at home, all the self-care stuff, the stuff that makes you feel sexy, that makes you feel attractive, that makes you feel like you want to do that, you want to be that person, goes. A lot of women struggle with their identity after they have a baby, not just even after the first baby. Sometimes, it can happen after you have a second baby and suddenly the workload has doubled and you have less time for self-care and all of that stuff. But particularly after you have a first baby and that transition into becoming this new version of you, you don't know how to be that old version of you anymore. And if you're not feeling attractive, you're not going to want to be getting your kit off and getting it on. So all of those things play a part in that first year. What can then happen from a relationship perspective is that partners don't always understand this. So when I explain to women in my practice, particularly the stuff around what's happening with the hormones, so what I talked about, the oxytocin, that those needs are being met, they're being touched outside of it, a lot of women feel quite relieved and go, oh, okay, so it's not me, as in it's, why am I not finding, is it I'm not finding them attractive anymore? Is it I'm not? A lot of women can feel quite resentful towards a partner. I'm stuck at home with the baby, you get to leave the house, all of that stuff. So I'm not, it's not necessarily making me feel warm and fuzzy feelings towards you in the evening. But then obviously the husband, the male counterpart, can feel rejected and pushed out, and a bit like, well, this baby's come in, and now I've been pushed out. Right. So all those things come together, and it's something that, for a lot of women becomes an issue that they just don't want to. And then I don't know if you've had this, probably you have, you probably know more about it than I do, but the longer you don't do it, the harder it is to then start again. Yeah, to get back in the saddle, as it were. So that's kind of, there's some science behind it. When you're breastfeeding, obviously your periods don't return because your body's going, you don't need to make a baby, because clearly you're still feeding a baby. And then therefore your sex drive's not going to come back then either, because again, the old part of your brain's going, we don't need to make a baby because clearly we've got one. So it's difficult. You're battling against all of those things that are not going to put that at the top of your to-do list. And then comes the guilt that you're not doing it, and you feel like you should. And you feel the guilt that you're saying no all the time, or you're pushing a partner away. Have you ever had that? Has people talk that to you about this sort of stuff before?
Yeah, so I actually interviewed a few moms that were on here, and they were mentioning these things. And a lot of the reasoning behind this podcast is actually to bring awareness to a lot of this stuff and to show moms that they're not alone and what they're going through. But I'd really love to give some resolutions, right? So we understand the science behind it. We understand why it's happening. What can we do about it?
So the main things I will always say is don't pressure yourself. The first thing I would say is obviously communicate to your partner. So explain what's going on. Even I have a blog post that I wrote about this, and I'll say to, when I'm working with patients, I'll direct them to the blog post and say, get your partner to read that, because that's going to at least explain some of the sciencey stuff, because again, purely talking about the male brain, they quite like it if they can understand that there's a bit of maybe a scientific reason behind things, right?
Yeah.
Part of the problem comes when there is no communication and one person just feels like, oh, maybe, you don't find me attractive anymore, or the mother's worrying that he's going to think that he doesn't find me attractive anymore because I don't look the way I used to. Communication is going to be the first thing. So to actually have a conversation and explain. Then the other thing I think is to start building intimacy back in. And it doesn't have to be the end goal being to have sex. So we start with the really small things. Like, I always use this analogy because it's from my own life, but not in the house we live in now, but in our old house when our daughter was born, we used to have two sofas in this particular house. So one on one wall and one on kind of like that on the other wall. And obviously we both used to take a sofa each, in the evening. So we weren't sitting together. And I just think things like sitting together on the sofa in the evening and watching a TV show, but sitting together, having some physical connection, legs over legs, or, whatever it might be. So you're starting to slowly build that. Going for walks, and I'm not trying to be twee and romantic like some sort of movie, but going for walks and holding hands, kissing hello and goodbye, just small things where you can start to rekindle or rebuild that physical connection, and then building that slowly so that you're not just feeling that pressure to say, we're going to go straight to that. Sometimes if clients have got if I'm working with clients who've got where there's a real entrenched problem, then we look at doing a sort of program where you both agree that sex is completely off the table. So there's no pressure at all to do it. But we're going to then go each night, we're going to do a different activity in the bedroom. But with the goal being that we're not allowed to have sex. So there's no pressure whatsoever, but we're building slowly back up to that. I think for the mum, there's a lot of work to do around loving yourself again and loving your body, and whatever that might look like for you. So for some women, that might be that they want to slowly get back into training. They might want to lose weight, any baby weight they've put on. For other women, it might just be loving the body they're in. And that might be things like, again, relating to me, one of the things that I always do, you can't really tell right now because it's quite a pale colour, but I always have my nails painted. And after I had my daughter, and my anxiety was really bad, my mental health was quite bad, I wasn't doing any of those things. I didn't feel like myself because I wasn't doing the things that I used to do. And one Sunday, I just thought, right, I'm going to spend an hour, I'm going to paint my nails. And I did it, and I felt so good that I'd painted my nails. And I felt like, oh, I feel like that's a connection to the old me. And from there on in, I started to feel like I was coming out of that fog that you go into when you've had a baby. Like even the clothes you wear are different. I used to work in a city. I wasn't a therapist then. I used to work in the city, and I wore makeup and heels and smart clothes. And then suddenly I was a mum, and I wore leggings and jeans and trainers and t-shirts and my hair like up in a bun, and I wasn't bothering at all because I didn't have the time to. But slowly, as we got into a routine, as she got a bit older, as she slept better, and I started to do little things, I started to rekindle that in myself more. And then I started to feel more, I suppose, attractive within myself. But that's a personal journey for everybody, and it's what that looks like for you. But
and
I think that, go on.
I was gonna say, if you are listening to this, how do you know when you need to seek help? Right? Like if someone is in a mental state, and how do they know where it's the normal, quote unquote, I want to say quote unquote, the normal fog that we're talking about, or it's time for some help here?
And that's the other thing I was going to say. Underlying all of this, obviously, is someone's mental health. And we're kind of talking about your average mom who's not struggling with postnatal depression, who's not struggling with anxiety, and who's just had a baby and is struggling with whatever. The thing with any kind of postnatal stuff, The general rule of thumb for me is, and I mean, statistically, a lot of women get the baby blues sort of, within the first 8 to 10 days of having a baby. You will have that low period. If you find that you're starting to avoid things, if you're avoiding seeing friends, if you're avoiding going and doing things you would normally do that you would normally enjoy, if you're recognizing that you're feeling low, a quick thing you can do is ask yourself every day on a scale of 1 to 10, how do I feel today? 10 being amazing and 1 being the worst I've ever felt. Now, 10s are reserved for things like Christmas Day, your birthday, going on holiday, right? We're never a 10 every day, but we want to live between the 5 and the 8. That's your average. Like 8's a really good day. Between 5 and 8 is where you want to live. We all have the odd day where things will go wrong and we're a 3 because your car's broken down, or you have a bad day at work, or you have a row with your partner. If you notice that every day over a consistent period you're scoring yourself 5 and below, then I would say we're starting to be in the realms of maybe there's an issue. If you're noticing that your anxiety is high every day, then there's an issue. There is a little quiz that I have. It's based on the questionnaires that I use in my practice, that are the actual kind of standard NHS questionnaires, medical questionnaires, that give a score for anxiety and a score for depression. But generally, those are the things. If you notice that you're avoiding doing things that you would normally like to do, if you're not wanting to see friends, if you're not going out, you can tell that you're worrying more than normal. If your anxiety is high, when we're anxious, we avoid things. So if we're saying no to things because of worry, obviously, if you're more emotional, if you're crying, high emotion. If you're more irritable, it's very difficult because obviously if you're a new mum, sleep isn't happening, and that causes you to be more, all your emotions come to the surface. So it's very difficult. But I would generally say if your world is starting to get smaller, that's when there's a problem. If you're finding that you're not going out, not seeing people, not doing things, your world is starting to become smaller. Whether that's from anxiety or low mood, that's when there's a problem, and definitely go and speak to somebody. 100%.
Yeah. And so when it comes to sex, how long after, I mean, I guess you said about a year until you think there's a problem, you should go to somebody.
I think that's a difficult one. That's a really difficult one to answer, because that's down to an individual couple. Because if you're with someone who's got a really low sex drive, and after you have a baby your sex drive is low, that might not be an issue for either of you for quite some time. But if you're with a partner who's got a really high sex drive, they might start, when I say putting pressure, I don't mean in a just in a normal kind of couple healthy way, in which case it's going to become an issue sooner. So if that's starting to become an issue within your relationship, then it's time to go and see it. But I don't think the only sort of number you can put on that is you are cleared medically to resume an intimate relationship 6 weeks after you give birth, as long as it's been a standard birth, right? So after 6 weeks, medically they would say you can. Emotionally and mentally, that is down to each woman, because it's also to do with what other support do you have. You might have one woman who's got loads of family around her, loads of support, financially really stable, all of that. She might, for want of a better word, bounce back quicker than another mum who has not got any support. Husband works longer hours, financial worries and stresses. Maybe the birth was more difficult. Maybe breastfeeding's more difficult. Thinking about the body image, some women might lose their baby weight really quickly, other women don't. So it's very, very difficult to put a timeline on that. I think, again, if it's starting to impact your relationship, when you feel that is the time to go and speak to somebody, and whether that's individually or as a couple.
Yeah.
I've worked with women who will come to me individually because they'll say, my partner's great, he's really understanding, but I'm struggling with the guilt that I feel that I don't want to do it and I don't know why.
Yeah.
And I've equally worked with couples as well. So I think only you will know, and I don't think you can put a time frame on that.
Yeah. So if somebody wants to reach out and work with you, how can they find you? Where can they find you?
So they can either find me on my website, which is andreawitththerapy.com, or on Instagram and Facebook. I'm Andrea_Witt_mum_therapist. And they can find me any of those ways.
Oh, I love it. Well, thank you so much. This was so enlightening. I'm sure a lot of moms listening are getting a lot more clear as to why it is that maybe they don't want to have sex right after having a baby. It made it very clear. So thank you so much for this amazing conversation. I really appreciate you being here.
No worries, it was joy. It was fascinating. I loved it.
Well, thank you guys. Reach out to Andrea for any other questions if you have. You can comment here or below and join me again for another episodes of Moms Talk Sex next week. Bye.